Taxation is more than revenue. It is a tool for development, unquote. Taxation is more than revenue. It is a tool for development, which is in line with the theme of this conference. You will all agree with me that taxation remains a cornerstone of modern governance and national development. It is the most reliable, non-debt source of revenue for government globally.
Tax is very important, and we're looking at taxes from income tax to consumption taxes, but also tariffs. What is happening in the world today, just because Mr. Donald Trump, the president of the US, decided to play around with taxes. By the way, tariffs are part of taxes. Just imagine the level of disruption that has been caused to the world economy in less than 3 months, just because of tariffs. It tells you the power of policies. You can use that to stimulate growth, and God forbid, you can use that to create a lot of problems.
Taxation, everyone knows, is a fundamental tool for financing development. But the role for subnational governments in tax reforms is often overlooked. As Nigeria continues to face fiscal challenges, it's crucial to understand how tax reforms can empower states and local governments. Let's explore how tax reforms can better align with subnational fiscal needs and aspirations.
Sound bites from the 27th Annual Tax Conference. As the saying goes, only 2 things are certain in life: death and taxes. Taxes are the oxygen for the development of man and society. Taxes are the bedrock of development everywhere in the world. Over the years, taxation has become one of the most important tools for human development. Where taxes and taxation are being discussed, everyone listens. Taxation has become a field of study and a professional calling. From Monday, May 12th to Thursday, May 15th, 2025, tax professionals from Nigeria and beyond gathered together for 4 days for the 27th Annual Tax Conference. It was as much an intellectual feast as it was an opportunity for networking, for exchange of ideas, for looking back, for addressing the present, and for planning for the future.
We hereby call to order the 27th Annual Tax Conference.
As you will expect, the 27th Annual Tax Conference was held at the point when work is being concluded on the tax reform bills, passage by both chambers of the National Assembly, leading to eventual assent by the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. As would be expected, therefore, a large part of the intellectual discussion centered around the post-reform outcome.
I think, as an institute, we deserve to appreciate and celebrate ourselves on the passing of the new fiscal and tax reform. You are happy that this was actually a success. Can you put your hands together and celebrate yourself?
Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, Chairman Fiscal Policy and Tax Reform Committee, set the ball rolling with his lead paper on Taxation for Development, Policies, Law and Implementation.
We will be having a lead paper presentation, and we'll be talking on having an insight on the latest tax reform and their impact on Nigerian development as it relates to the topic and the theme of the conference, which is taxation for development, policy, law, and implementation. To do justice to this is no other person than our own, the Chairman, Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and tax reform. Please, with a round of applause, let's make welcome to the podium our own Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, FCTR.
I'm pleased to be with you today to be talking about an issue that is not just important to us as professionals, but that is critical to our country, Nigeria. I particularly like the theme of the conference, which is Taxation for Development, because after all is said and done, the reason why we have taxation is because of the people. We'll be looking at the progress we have made as a people, where we are in the journey, and what lies ahead, and what you need to do about it, as it relates to policies, laws, and implementation. So the outline that I have for you, knowing that time is never enough, is to start by putting the reforms we are undergoing now in proper context, and then share with you what I consider to be some of the top critical changes being introduced. And we should then make an assessment of how ready we are to implement the reforms and what I consider to be the call to action. If the global tax system were to be race cars, that is, cars wanting to enter into a race, this is what Nigeria will look like. This is a 1960 Volkswagen. The top and leading economies in Africa, like South Africa, they look like that more modern Peugeot. And the developed economies, where they generate a lot of revenues and their tax system is developed, such as Australia, the United States of America, UK, France, it will be that car. That's a Tesla truck. That's the OECD. The features of our tax system as we have it today is such that Nigeria's tax system is unconducive for growth. The system is making it hard, if not impossible, for us to grow. We have multiplicity of taxes and multiplicity of taxing agencies. We have very high corporate tax burden on businesses, paying more than 40% effective tax rate on their profits. We tax poverty. Our lowest income earners have to pay income taxes. We tax capital. We also tax investments. We do all of this using archaic laws, many of them older than Nigeria's independence. And they have a lot of ambiguous provisions, making it even more complex for those who are willing to comply. And the list goes on and on. From this picture I've just painted to you, you would agree with me that in this race, it is almost impossible for us to win. And it doesn't matter how hard we work or how hard we pray. What we need is to replace that vehicle. And that means our old laws can no longer serve us. If we must develop, we need new laws. Many of us have been following the tax reform, and it's the right thing to do. Maybe we need to even do more. We went through a very rigorous and elaborate process to come up with the bills in the first place. And that led to the draft bills. And those draft bills were subsequently presented to Mr. President for approval, which Mr. President approved, and they were transmitted to the National Assembly for consideration. The National Assembly did their first reading, although very chaotic, second reading, had public hearing, stakeholder engagement, and they have now done third and final reading at both the House of Representatives and the Senate. Because they have different versions that they have now passed, they have now set up a conference committee to harmonize the two versions of the bill so they can send a clean, harmonized copy to Mr. President for assent. And that is the stage where we are now. The next stage after that is presidential assent for Mr. President to sign. So why are we reforming? So the reason why we are reforming is that the fiscal environment in Nigeria is constrained. Our tax to GDP ratio is very low, just about 10% before 2024. The good news is, as a result of the reforms ongoing, including subsidy removal, FS flotation, as well as fiscal reforms, we have seen tax to GDP ratio for 2024 increase to over 13%. In just 1 year, we have increased our tax to GDP ratio by more than 3%. This is almost like a world record, and we should celebrate it. Our budget deficit, thank you, our budget deficit was expanding to a point where it was becoming very alarming. Nigerian government was printing naira to spend to cover budget deficits. The past administration printed more than 30 trillion naira. And it is not surprising that this led to very high, sticky, and stubborn inflation subsequently. It was a given it was going to happen. You cannot print money without corresponding productivity and expect inflation to be at the same level. We over-rely on oil revenue to finance government and to earn FX. We, at a point in 2022, the federal government spent up to 97% of its revenue just to service debts. If that does not worry anyone in the room, then it must be from a different planet. When you spend almost your revenue just to service debts, it means that everything you spend money on, from paying civil servants, from running overhead, capital expenditure, you are borrowing it. That is the fastest way to get into a debt trap. And once a country gets into a debt trap, it just gets worse because you keep printing more money. Our tax policies promote inequity, and we place too much burden on taxpayers. We have distortionary incentive schemes, and we have uncompetitive tax regime. Our tax laws need to be harmonized because there are just too many taxes and levies. They are complex to comply with, the cost of compliance is high, and the laws are obsolete. The administration of our tax system, though has improved, has a long way to go, both in terms of using technology efficiently, in terms of better collaboration within and among governments, as well as reducing the cost of not just compliance, but the cost of administration. It is in Nigeria that we heard of governments, states, different levels, where some cost of collecting some taxes is as high as 35%, when the global standard is maximum of 1%. We also need to modernize our tax system and ensure that it's rewarding the right behavior while increasing the punishment for bad behavior.
Mr. Yedele proceeded to lay out the building blocks of the ongoing tax reforms.
So, how are we reforming the system? It's important for me to lay this foundation of how we are reforming the system. Many people would easily tell you that these tax reforms is about generating more revenue. and I will disagree. When you want to reform the tax system with the objective of generating more revenue, you place the cart before the horse. Revenues and taxes don't fall from heaven. Taxes are the consequences of economic activities. When I make profits, when I earn a salary, when I spend the money I earn, I pay taxes. So if you want to generate more revenue, promote more economic activities and prosperity, and collecting taxes will be a natural consequence. We also need to remember that we're not collecting taxes for the sake of collecting taxes. We collect taxes so we can improve the lives, livelihood, and the well-being of the people. Therefore, any tax reforms, tax policies, fiscal policies, monetary policies, what have you, if they distort economic activities, they are bad policies. If they undermine the well-being of the people, they're not good policies. Therefore, we set out with these reforms with three broad objectives. One is to be people-centric. How can we help our people, poor, rich, middle class? Number two is growth focus. How can we grow in an inclusive and sustained manner? And number three, efficiency driven. How do we drive efficiency? Please remember those three. These reforms are people-centric, they are growth-focused, and they are efficiency-driven. Generating revenue will happen as a natural consequence. In the process of doing that, we said we must look at Nigeria's fiscal framework. Issues around our fiscal governance, revenue, debts, spending. What are we spending our money on? By the way, the reforms are not just about taxes. They're about the fiscal system, including spending and borrowing. How do we transform our revenues beyond taxes? How about government assets, government-owned enterprises, natural resources beyond oil and gas? How do we facilitate economic growth and promote competitiveness? Our businesses, why can they not be multinationals? Why is it hard for exporters to export out of Nigeria? Why are small businesses struggling? We can address all of that because they were not imposed on us by God, neither were they imposed on us by the United Nations. They're self-inflicted pains, and it is time for us to remove them. We also want to see how to improve coordination of government policies so that when fiscal authorities are pushing to the right, monetary is not pushing to the left. We have to go together in one direction, laser focus, as a team with a clear objective about our dear country, Nigeria. Then, of course, tax is very important. And we're looking at taxes from income tax to consumption taxes, but also tariffs. What is happening in the world today, just because Mr. Donald Trump, the president of the US, decided to play around with taxes. By the way, tariffs are part of taxes. Just imagine the level of disruption that has been caused to the world economy in less than 3 months, just because of tariffs. It tells you the power of policies. You can use that to stimulate growth, and God forbid, you can use that to create a lot of problems. We're introducing some significant changes to our tax system to make it efficient, to promote prosperity, to make it harder to evade your taxes, to moderate aggressive tax planning, to rationalize our incentives, and to use technology to get tax intelligence. We have growth enablers. What are those things that will enable us grow? Including incentives for priority sectors of our economy, for exports, higher exemption threshold for small businesses so they can breed and grow. How do we promote formalization of businesses? The system we have in Nigeria today creates a disincentive for you to formalize your business. And I'll just give you the numbers. If you're a very honest and patriotic Nigerian, and you set up a business as Taiwo Enterprises, and you want to pay all your taxes, the maximum effective income tax you will pay is less than 20%. Even if you earn 1 billion naira profit, you will not pay up to 19%. It's about 18.6. If you register that same business as Taiwo Nigeria Limited, from the following year, your effective tax rate is over 40%. How does that make sense? In a country that you have significant informal sector, we are discouraging them from formalization, and then we turn around and say we are unable to collect taxes from the informal sector. We set them to the black market. It will be hard to collect taxes. It is time to fix it. We must address structural issues. If you are transporting yam from the north and you are going to the south, we were told by those transporters that their budget is somewhere between 500,000 naira and 700,000 naira that they will pay along the line. Some legal, some illegal taxes. 2,000 here, 3,500 here, 4,000 here. It adds up. When the yams get to Lagos, the poor man cannot afford the yam because we have nuisance taxes all over the place. Our tax laws today, including even our constitution, is part of the problem. We have bicycle taxes. We have wheelbarrow taxes. We have produce taxes. We tax television and radios in 2025. We're better than this. So it's time for us to make changes and reform the system. Many of you would have seen the withholding tax regulation. In many cases, we withhold a higher percentage than you can ever make in profits, tying down your working capital, increasing your cost of doing business, and then we're surprised that you're not growing. Why should we continue like that? When you deduct 10% on my turnover, you make an assumption that my net profit will not be less than 33%. How many businesses make a net margin of 33%? God help you, you want to claim a refund. Not only would it take time, it will be painful, and in many cases, you end up with a liability to pay to the government. You will beg them to discontinue with the refund process. This does not build trust in the system.
What are the expected dividends of the reforms?
Our deliverables, although what most people know about our reform today are the tax reform bills. But the tax reform bills are less than 20% of the work we're doing. We're not complaining. Whatever creates the national awareness is good enough. But we have the national fiscal policy, which is an advancement on the national tax policy we have implemented first in 2012 and then in 2017, but broader now, beyond taxes. It sets out the principle for how we spend our money, what we spend money on, the quality of spending, and the priority of spending. It talks about subsidy. What should we subsidize? How should we subsidize it? Should we just share money to people that we think are poor? Or should we encourage them to add value to the economy and being paid in the process? Should we subsidize agriculture? Should we subsidize electricity? If so, to who and how? How do we deal with the environment? Issues of sustainable development goals. How do we ensure that our policies are inclusive of women, of young people, and people with disabilities? All of these are covered in the National Fiscal Policy Framework. And of course, there's the tax reform bills, and we're also working on reform of the Nigerian budgeting system. Our budget is not working for us. We have sent 10 constitutional amendments to the National Assembly because we identify some of the problems we are facing emanated from the Constitution. The key performance indicators, this is how we'll know whether we have been successful, includes enabling environment for businesses. If you are doing anything legitimate, Nigeria should promote you. That is why Mr. President said, we no longer want to tax seed, we will tax fruits. We don't want to tax poverty anymore. We'll help you prosper and share in your prosperity. Another one is effective policy coordination, fair taxation, responsible borrowing, and sustainable spending. So let me now tell you about what to expect from these reforms. The expectation is that as a result of these reforms, you will have immense benefits to businesses, large and small, domestic or multinational. You have immense benefits for households, including individuals and families. You have significant benefit for government across levels, federal, state, and local government. And by extension, Nigeria would win. When Nigeria succeeds, it is easy for Nigerians to be successful. If what you are doing undermines the success of your country, you should not be doing it. But if Nigeria is working, you can always find a place in it for yourself. For businesses, we are looking to de-risk the environment and reduce their business risk by eliminating minimum tax on companies, where we ask them to pay taxes on their capital even when they are making losses. This is one of the fastest ways to kill a company. It's like saying someone who is an intensive care unit to donate blood. It does not make sense. Lower tax burden means we reduce the tax rates, even though the governors and the lawmakers have said we should pause on reducing CIT rates. We believe that in no time we have the opportunity to reconsider that. Our tax rates are too high. You have the ability to pay your taxes in Naira. It is counterproductive to ask companies in your country to pay you taxes in foreign currency. How does that make sense? Because you buy a software from Google, from Amazon, from Zoom, and you have to pay them in dollars. It makes sense. They're not Nigerian companies. But there's withholding tax and VAT. First, you go to the forex market to look for the $1,000 to pay to Zoom or Google. You go back again for another 10%, another 7.5% to pay Nigerian government withholding tax and VAT. Putting unnecessary pressure on the Naira that makes Naira to devalue and creates more pain in form of inflation and pass-through to cost of doing business without adding $1 to the liquidity in Nigeria. That also has been addressed. Pay your taxes in Naira. We should be proud of our own currency because it's the only one that we truly have. Reforms will be faster. I spent over 20 years in private practice. I got refund only once in more than 20 years. Whereas you go to a country like South Africa, you go to Rwanda, and they will proudly tell you you can get your refund in 72 hours, 3 days. Rwanda is trying to hit 24 hours to pay refunds. Why can't Nigeria do something better? Why does it take years? Dispute resolution in Rwanda is now between 60 to 90 days from when you start the dispute resolution to when it's completed, 90 days. We have some running 10 years and still going in Nigeria. It is a problem for us to fix. It does not require prayers. It just requires actions and the willingness to do the right thing, no matter whether it's in our favor individually, but whether it favors us collectively. We have a competitive tax regime, like allowing businesses to claim input credit on their VAT for assets, for services, in addition to inventory. Many people in the room today are into professional practice. When you buy any items, you buy a laptop, you buy a phone, you buy a generator, you pay for services, you cannot claim the input VAT. Once the reforms are implemented, you'll be able to claim all your input VAT. Because businesses are vehicles for carrying out economic activities. They should not have to carry the burden of consumption taxes. It should be passed on to the final consumer, thereby reducing the cost of doing business. We will have unilateral economic tax relief. If you do business outside Nigeria, you bring your profits, we will not tax you twice. We will give you unilateral tax credit, even if Nigeria has no double tax treaty with that other country, because it is not a crime to do business across border. We want it to be multinational companies. We want Nigerian firms. Why can't tax firms in Nigeria have alliances and presence in many countries in Africa? What's stopping us? After all, we now have the African Continental Free Trade Area, and our space is no longer limited to this geographical location called Nigeria of 200 and plus million people. It is now Africa with about 1.5 billion people. For households, there will be economic reliefs from wage award, transport subsidy, to incentives and waivers of taxes on food items, as well as suspension of taxes on fuel products. There will be lower tax burden. The tax reforms would exempt about 1/3 of all workers, private and public sector combined. We no longer have to pay personal income taxes because they are poor. When your citizens are poor in a sane society, if everything works well, you should pay them every month so they can meet their basic needs. When people can't feed and they cannot buy pencil and eraser for that kid to go to school, they cannot pay their rent. They're very afraid for when they get sick, they cannot find 500 naira to buy the drug. They're not in a position to pay taxes. They should receive support from the government. If you cannot provide support, it is wickedness to ask them to pay taxes, at least on their income. When they consume and there's VAT, they can pay, but not income taxes. These reforms will exempt the bottom 33% of all workers from paying income taxes. And the middle class, constituting another 60% of our population and workers, will see a reduction in their tax liabilities on a monthly basis. And that means only about 3% of workers, the top 3%, some of them are in the room, they will pay more taxes because it's the right thing to do. That is how you can promote equity and have a system that is truly progressive. The poor should not be the one paying the highest amount of taxes. These reforms will create opportunities for us. If tax professionals were listed in the stock market, our values have just gone up in multiple folds. But you have to position yourself to take advantage of those opportunities. There will be opportunities for small businesses and startups. These reforms promote more investment in research and innovation. If you look around the world, the leading countries in the world invest heavily in research and development. But what do we have in our tax laws? We punish companies for investing in research. We tie their ability to invest in research to whether they make profit, and it's a small percentage. It will interest you to know that some of the largest companies in the world today, including Uber, including Amazon, they did not make profit for more than 10 years. They were making losses. But the system in the US allows them to take risk. They were not asked to pay minimum tax. They were not asked to stop investing in research because they had no profits. And that's exactly what we have in Nigeria. But it's time for a change. Let's innovate. Let's develop. Let us grow. And when we grow, revenues will come. We have designed our system to say we do not trust taxpayers and therefore should treat all of them with suspicion. We punish everyone, whether they're honest or not, because we don't trust some. Whereas what we need to do is to design the system to find out who is doing the wrong thing and punish them and encourage those who are doing the right thing. For government, for example, for individuals, our young people are not able to get jobs in the digital economy because if a multinational outside Nigeria employs a Nigerian in Nigeria, that multinational gets into trouble with our tax authorities. We'll say they have created a permanent establishment. They should come and file returns. They're going to be asking themselves, what is so special about the Nigerians? when I can employ Kenyans, I can employ South Africans, I can employ Filipinos, Indians, and don't have to worry about going to their country to pay tax. We were not getting those opportunities. I've said it many times, Philippines makes more than $30 billion from this. India makes more than $200 billion. Nigeria cannot even boast of $1 billion because we've created a system that discourages those multinationals to hire us. Imagine, if only 1 million young Nigerians can get a job within the digital economy without leaving Nigeria, any $1,000 to $2,000 a month, that's a minimum of $1 billion every month flowing into Nigeria. Not only would that strengthen the Naira, it creates economic power for those 1 million people. And we know in Nigeria, every one person who is gainfully employed carries another 5 to 10 people along with them by paying school fees and rent and so on and so forth. That is how to stimulate growth and spread prosperity.
Still on outcomes.
We expect that our tax to GDP ratio as a result of these reforms would improve to at least 18% within the next 3 years. We expect that non-oil performance would improve significantly, such that we no longer rely heavily on revenue from oil. There will be more fiscal transparency and more responsible spending of government revenue for the benefit of the people.
Mr. Oyedele again proceeded to share with the audience what he referred to as the big changes.
So let me quickly tell you about some of the big changes, even though I've mentioned some of them. I know time is never a friend when we have a conference like this. I'll tell you 10 of the most important changes, and I'll go and sit down quietly. The first one I want to tell you about is the reform to the VAT system. You will be eligible to claim input VAT on assets and on services, so long as your output is either zero rated or is standard rated. Remember also that we are turning the VAT on food, on education, and on health to 0% instead of exempt. And because I'm speaking to professionals, you know that means that I can now claim my input VAT even though my output is zero. If you were to be exempt, you can't claim your input. If you can't claim your input, it adds up to your cost and increases your selling prices for your goods and services. In addition to that, we are introducing as well the self-accounting and withholding for VAT for large firms. Some of that is already in place. We are strengthening it. You'll be eligible to claim VAT refund whenever you have a VAT refund. And the law we have drafted says you must be paid within 30 days, even without an audit for VAT. But God help you, and you have misrepresented your claims. Your penalty will be 200%, no questions asked. What this does, it places significant amount of responsibility on the taxpayer. And by extension, this is a lot of work for tax professionals because companies will now need professionals to come and help them validate that their tax position is correct before they make any claims. There's also a provision that we have that if an item is liable to VAT and VAT has not been charged, whether it's an asset, you cannot claim capital allowances. If it's an expense, you cannot claim a tax deduction for it. We want to make it more expensive for tax evaders. The second one is PIT reforms. We are reforming the personal income tax system. And this would include exemption for low-income earners. It will include the ability to formalize informal sector. It will include removing reliefs and allowances. And many people do not understand this. Even many tax professionals have complained. They say, why did you remove all our personal relief and allowances? As if it was meant to be a bad thing. And I said, how does it matter? If I say your income is 1,000, and I will not tax you on 200, but I will tax you on 800 at 20%. That means you pay 160 naira. What if I say your entire 1,000, no relief, but I'll tax you at 10%? You pay 100 naira. Isn't the second one better than the first? The reason why we decided to remove the reliefs and allowances is because it makes the tax system too complicated for non-tax experts to even file their own returns. By law, every taxable person, poor or rich or middle class, must file returns. How many of them can afford tax professionals? And yet they can't figure out what is reliefs and allowances. If we keep it simple, more people will comply. It does not take away from the fact that big companies will still need your help as professionals. We had what we call fiscal drag. Fiscal drag is when you drag your poorest citizens to the highest tax band rate. The last time we looked at personal income tax law in Nigeria significantly was 2011. As of that time, once you hit about 3.6 million, you pay the marginal rate, the highest band. That's where you'll be at 24%. Less reliefs, you come down to around 19. Why should someone who barely earns 300,000 naira a month pay the same rate as the billionaire who earns 1 billion a month? That is inequity at the highest level. You cannot drag your poorest people to the top band rate. It is a misnomer. We have corrected that. That is why also if you look at the tax table, we now have a first band of 0%. And that amount has been increased altogether now to about 1.3 million naira per annum, which means if you earn a little over 100,000 per month, you don't have to worry about PAYE. The good news is not just for those individuals. The good news is also for small businesses. More than 99% of all the small businesses in Nigeria, over 30 million of them, they don't pay up to 100,000 naira to their staff. Now they no longer have to worry about PAYE, because before now, somebody will show up and say, "Oga, madam, you don't pay payee," and the person is wondering what is payee. And they now say, "You're owing government 2 million. They begin to negotiate. Usually that ends up in two accounts. One private account to pay 500,000, the official one to pay something much less. They allow you rest for 6 months and they show up again. We cannot continue with that. For CIT reforms, we are introducing 0% for small businesses. This time around, we threshold up to 100 million naira. If your annual turnover is 100 million or less, your CIT rate is 0%. This is one of our strategies to encourage formalization, reduce the burden on the poor, as well as vulnerables. By the way, our poorest citizens tend to patronize small businesses. When you make life easy for those small businesses, by extension, you make life easy for the majority of the Nigerian people. We have introduced simplified returns in the tax reform bills, where you don't need audited financial statements to be able to file returns if you're a small business. The system will become more friendly and it will be self-service. Capital allowance regime has been transformed. You no longer have, initial allowance, investment allowance, reducing balance, TWDV is no longer necessary. It's unnecessary complication. What we have now is class 1, class 2, class 3. Simple way of calculating capital allowances. And you don't need to keep 10 naira in the book anymore. Why are you keeping 10 naira? Okay? Just focus on what is the cost of your assets and claim a deduction by way of capital allowances over the life. There will be no need for certificate of capital acceptance for fixed assets anymore to claim capital allowances. Some people are not happy because they make money from doing CAFA. CAFA adds no value to that process. We do not want professionals or anyone for that matter to profit from the pain of the other Nigerian person. We want you to make money by helping others succeed. Therefore, in these tax reform bills, the opportunities available to you as tax professional, in my view, has increased more than 10-folds. Your hands will be full. Let me tell you, do you know that the combined number of professionals in accounting, in tax, and law in Nigeria, if you take, because the MBA guys are almost about 140,000, there are many. All the rest of us, CITN, ICANN, ANAN combined, is under 150,000. It's not even enough to put one person in one company in Nigeria. Before you consider private sector, small businesses, and public sector, we are not enough to go around. Once compliance starts in Nigeria, our estimation is that a minimum of 10 million Nigerians, top 10 million Nigerians, will need help to file their returns out of about 220 million people. Can we cope helping 10 million people file returns? If anything must preoccupy us today, it's about how to build capacity fast and build quality capacity embedded with ethics. And I'll tell you briefly about it in a while. So we also have another reform around capital gains tax. Our capital gains tax system today in Nigeria says pay 10% on your capital gains. Whether you made 10 billion naira or you make 1 million naira, you pay 10%. That is regressive. What we have done now is we've done away with a rate for CGT. CGT no longer has a rate of its own. CGT is now part and parcel of your income tax. In other words, if I'm a low-income earner and I have a chargeable gain, my CGT is 0%. If I'm a middle class and I have capital gains, my effective tax rate might be 15%. If you're a very rich person, your capital gain tax rate will be 25%. If you're a company and you're a small business, your CGT is 0%. If you're a company and you're a large company, your CGT is 30%. Your CGT will now take the life of your income tax status. And this one is significant. We have retained and even expanded the exemption for the capital market. If you invest in the capital market, you will not pay CGT until you have sold significantly more than 250 million in 12 months. This is because we want to expand our capital market. Nigeria's capital market today is not even up to $50 billion. South Africa's capital market is over $1 trillion, which means you can finance almost anything out of the capital market in South Africa. But in Nigeria, you will struggle. And if you cannot finance your growth, you cannot grow. Especially in a country where if you go to the bank, your interest rate is around 40%. So only the very, very rich people making a lot of money will have to pay any tax in the capital market. Another reform is curbing evasion. The data we have suggests to us that the tax gap is the difference between the taxes you collect and the taxes you should be collecting, all things being equal. That gap in Nigeria is in the region of 70%. We only collect about 30% of what we could possibly collect. 70% is evaded. Part of that is due to policy, where we grant all manners of waivers and incentives. We are addressing that. As part of that, I told you already, if you import an item and it's liable to import duties and you have not paid the import duties correctly, you cannot claim capital allowance if it's an asset. You cannot claim a deduction if it's an expense item, like inventory. If you buy an item and it's liable to VAT, and VAT has not been charged, pay attention to that. Not whether VAT has been paid. In the case of import duties, it is whether duties have been paid, because you don't do duties on credit. In the case of VAT, it is whether VAT has been charged for you to get capital allowance or deduction, as the case may be. We are introducing an intelligence system whereby there will be fiscalization. Any invoice that you issue, a copy of it is downloaded to the tax authority's database immediately. If you buy 1,000 of these microphones to sell, by buying it, you have to report it for inventory. The system will capture the amount of inventory you just bought. When you sell a microphone, the system will deduct 1 from your system. If you sell that microphone without complying with fiscalization introduced by government, the system of government will not see it. At the end of the year, when you show up to file your account, you say closing inventory of microphone is 300 units. The system says it's 700. They will ask you, what happened to 400 microphones? Did they disappear? It will be an indication that you sold those 400 outside of the system approved by the government. Evasion will be easily detectable.
On the qualification and accreditation of tax consultants.
And there is this next one that is quite sensitive, particularly to this audience, is the regulation of tax agents. And I know the views of many of our senior colleagues in the room, but I will explain the concept to you. And it's now left to you to make a decision whether you think it is right or wrong. First is, what are the issues? The issues we find with data is that the tax professional, they can be a catalyst for progress if they do the right thing. They can be a virus when they do the wrong thing. It turns out, unfortunately, that the vast majority of tax agents in Nigeria are doing the wrong things. We could not find any distinction between the professional bodies they belong to. Many of them lack technical competence, and a bigger percentage lack ethical behavior. There are tax professionals, accountants, and lawyers who sell tax evasion for a living. Just think about that for a moment. You go to a company, they say our tax is 6 million, you say nobody pays 6 million. Just give me 2, I'll sort it out. You collect 2 million from them, keep 1 for yourself, give 500 to a tax officer who is a willing partner, pay 500 to the government, and you move to another client. You repeat again next year of assessment. How can we grow the country like that? I've been involved myself in doing ethical training for professionals, ICANN, CITN, and you will see after the session people will come to you with genuine concerns. And they say, I want to do the right thing. In fact, someone said to me, I don't understand what they are saying because I worked in a big 4. That their livelihood depends on whether they're able to play games. That if they tell the client you must pay the right amount of tax, they just fire you and hire the next person who is willing to play the game. How can you develop a system that is rewarding bad behavior and punishing honesty? It is not sustainable. Therefore, we need to regulate that process by collecting data that we can use to take decisive action against wrongdoing, and at the same time use that intelligence to reward good behaviors. We have touting today. If somebody shows up to a small business owner and says, I'm a tax consultant, how would they know whether they are lying or not? How would they verify they are a member of CITN or ICANN or ANAN or MBA? They have no means. It's least of their problem. So what would they do? They rely on the touts. Many taxpayers, even though some are themselves corrupt, and they'll ask for somebody to help them evade taxes, but there are a good number of taxpayers that are themselves victims of this system that is not properly regulated. Because they hire a consultant, they don't know whether the person is knowledgeable, and the person tells them that VAT and withholding tax normally cancel out. And I'm not joking, this is a real life example. VAT was 5% at the time, withholding tax was 5%. The guy says to the company, you don't need to remit anything. When you invoice, put 5%. When they deduct withholding tax, it cancels out. And they were doing it for years. There was another consultant. This consultant, the company trusted the guy. Help us do our account and file our returns for tax and pay taxes. The guy was not deducting withholding tax on his own fees for years. Tax authority came and put penalty and interest, and the amount was unbearable for the company. Of course, they fired the guy, but the damage was already done. Who is protecting that company? We need to fix that. So, what is this regulation all about? The tax agent regulation says, if you are technically competent, come and demonstrate it. You go through real-life filing of return scenarios for different taxes, personal taxes, transfer pricing, corporate income tax, CGT. Just imagine the reform we're introducing now. Some of us will learn this in less than 3-6 months. Some of us, the next 5 years, we're still asking whether there's a new fiscalization in town. But all of us are professionally qualified. How does that count for filing returns correctly? Technical competence. Number 2, experience. You must demonstrate that you have the right experience. You must demonstrate that you have the right qualifications. And then you must demonstrate ethics. You cannot see 10 million naira turnover and declare it as 2 million. We have seen from simple technology deployed by FRS and also by LRS in Lagos that even some of the biggest hotels declare less than 1/10 of their revenue to the tax authority. And we allow that to continue endlessly. This regulation would ensure that every tax agent will go through those processes and be registered with a unique number. An account will be created for you. First, you yourself must be tax compliant because you cannot give what you don't have. You lose the moral right to consult for anyone if you are evading your own taxes. Number 2, anything and everything you do for your clients is traced to your account. So that the day you go and tell your client that VAT rate is 7% instead of 7.5%, will know that you've created that problem for all your clients and be able to correct it and ask you to explain where you see your 7% from. If there's an ethical issue, you also have to explain. If you cannot explain convincingly, consequences include being suspended, and you can also be deaccredited such that you will never be able to represent anyone to file returns ever again. By the way, these reforms make it compulsory for every company to have a designated representative. It can be their own staff, but if it must be someone that they have to pay, it must be an accredited person. This will create a lot of demand for credible, professionally competent, and ethical tax professionals. Best case scenarios around the world include the United States of America, it includes Australia, Malaysia, and of course, South Africa. In fact, in South Africa, not only do they regulate tax agents, they regulate their professional bodies, and they have 10 professional bodies that they accredit, because even the professional body must demonstrate that they are training their members correctly. They're doing continuous professional development. They are promoting ethics, and they have a sound system for disciplinary processes when there's violation. And those processes must be made public. If there are new developments, how quickly would your members be up to speed? Technology in the use of filing returns and so on and so forth. So this regulation will benefit tax professionals immensely, but they have to earn it. You can't say it's your entitlement, you must earn it. And if you do the right thing consistently on the system, you become a trusted tax agent. What that means is returns you file will not even be audited. If you file any return and it has excess amount, the refund is paid automatically. There will be benefits to doing the right thing. When that happens, every taxpayer will be looking for that trusted tax agent because it makes their life easy. And a client that says, help me under declare, the tax agent will say, don't come and spoil my daily bread. Because when you join them in that tax evasion, you risk your livelihood. This system will therefore start rewarding doing the right thing. It will benefit the taxpayer themselves because they will now have credible professional advice from their tax consultants, and they can rely more on what they do on their behalf. Of course, it will benefit the government immensely so that the system can work for the benefit of all of us. And the last one here is the withholding tax regime, which has taken effect from 1st of January, eliminating withholding tax on small businesses, reducing the rate for many businesses, including professionals. You would have seen your own withholding tax rates have come down if you had a company for your consulting business. And you can now issue your own withholding tax credit note without waiting for the FRS, and so on and so forth. The last one I want to tell you about is the Economic Development Incentive Scheme. This reform will replace the Pioneer Status Scheme. It would ensure that Nigeria promotes investment in the areas that are most important to us as a country, particularly manufacturing, agriculture, power generation, mineral resources, steel and metal, transportation, industrial machinery, the environment, textile production, as well as other manufacturing, healthcare, education, and services such as the shared services centers and digital economy. There are thresholds for minimum investment you must make to be eligible for this incentive, and there's a sunset clause as to how long this incentive will be available per sector, so that we don't wake up in another 30 years to realize that we gave the wrong incentive at that time. These incentives make sense now, today. They may no longer make sense in another 20 years. The sunset clause means if you do nothing, it will come to an end. If you think it's still useful, have a national debate and extend it or modify it as the case may be. The cost of applying for this is going to be managed by the NIPC, and the fee they can collect from you is capped. You will not have to pay more than 5 million naira, even if you are investing $10 billion. The amount you pay to IID will do the certification of your investment, NIPC will give the certificate. All of them have caps as to how much they can collect, so that you are not exploited.
Next steps.
You would also know already that our national tax policy requires a minimum of 90 days advance notice before we implement changes to the tax system. We think that we even need more than 90 days because of the enormity of these reforms. So most likely, we're looking at the bills being signed into law before the end of May, at most June, and then maybe giving up to 6 months for us to build capacity, for us to prepare and be ready, so that implementation will most likely commence. If not, 1st of January 2026, maybe towards the end of 4th quarter of 2025. But when that is done, when the laws are signed, it does not mean the work has been done. It means the work has just begun. Because laws are only as good as how they are implemented. Otherwise, they are not worth the papers on which they are written. So we are mindful of that implementation will be critical. This is one of the reasons why, Mr. President, which is quite different and I think should be adopted, set up a committee and say to us, don't send me reports and come and take photos. You will sit with me and we will implement together. Each time we remember our Rosoya reports. I said, I wish somebody had set up the committee like they set up the Presidential Fiscal Policy and Tax Reform Committee. Those guys came up with brilliant ideas on how to improve efficiency in government. Submitted the report, take photos, and they were appreciated and they walked away. That report dies and resurrects now every 4 years. The problem they identified then has now more than multiplied. So I think this format of this our committee is a template that Nigeria should adopt. And for our friends from other African countries, I can see a couple of my friends in the room, something for the rest of Africa to consider as well. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about efforts, it's about impact and outcomes. In closing, how ready are we? And we need to be ready because these reforms are more than just tax. We must plan about people, plan about process, plan about technology. You need to plan for yourself and help your clients plan. If you work in a company, help your organization plan. You cannot just wake up one day and expect that this will happen magically. And more importantly, after planning, you must implement. In a nutshell, luck is where preparation meets opportunity. You must seek first to understand. Some of us have not even read the tax bills. But a good starting point is to read the summaries that the committee has presented. And then ultimately, you need to read the laws yourself. You must mind the gap between where the reforms are taking us and where you are today, and build the capacity to bridge the gap. That is the only time and the only way you can position yourself to take advantage of the reforms. Nigeria is not where we need to be. We have a journey ahead of us. And it's a journey that we can all embark upon together and get there. According to Abraham Lincoln, the best way to predict the future is to create it, not just complain about it. Thank you very much, and may God bless Nigeria.
Mr. Idoli's paper was well received and attracted robust questions. That will be the focus of our next outing of this continuing story on the 27th Annual Task Conference. If you have enjoyed our story, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on our social media handles. Following our feature of the question and answer session will be our feature on the sub-theme 1 with the topic, Tax Reforms and Expectations of Subnational. That session was led by His Excellency, Mr. Lucky Ayedatiwa, Executive Governor of Ondo State. And of course, it was not all talk. Participants had the opportunity to wind down, to lay down their airs. And of course, the leaders of tomorrow were not left out. There was an exciting debate session featuring university students, so you would do well to follow us closely.